I love the sports D&I roles because that's more about looking at fans or members and athletes and stuff. How do you make sure that everybody can play? Everybody can turn up if they want to? How do you make sure that the policies, suit everybody and accommodate everybody? So it's really working closely with people and culture teams, and also working really closely with marketing and sponsorship. You really become a team that works across the entire organisation, because what you're trying to do is lift their capability. The job at the end of the day, I think, is helping everyone in the organisation to open up their minds and think about who are we pitching things at, who are we talking to, who do we want to engage. You're breaking down 100, 200 years of tradition that really pitched sport to white men and saying, okay, what does that look like now for a lot of different communities?
G'day guys, coming up on the show today is Rana Hussain. Rana is a diversity and inclusion consultant who holds a number of incredible roles in the sports industry, including Program Director at the Champions of Change Coalition. She's a board member at the Victorian Women's Trust, as well as being a broadcaster at the ABC. She's an incredible person with an amazing resume, having previously held roles at the Richmond Footy Club and Cricket Australia. Today we delve into her journey in sport to become a leader in the diversity and inclusion space in sport, what goes on in these types of roles, and all the important elements you need to understand to be successful in the job. Let's go.
I started volunteering.
It's all about who you know in sport.
Am I going to be calling the last 10 seconds of the grand final?
You can connect with the interviewer. The hand goes up when they've got to make a decision.
Having a network is one of the most important things you can do.
I didn't necessarily follow my passion. I followed my curiosity.
Once you've worked in sport, there's no going back.
And then lo and behold, before I left, I got offered 2.
Hello and welcome to the SportsGRAD podcast, the ultimate guide to make it in the sports industry. I'm Ryan Walker. Joining me is the innovational Reuben Williams. We are two mates who met at Cricket Australia, and each week we learn how people made it in sports, and we tease out their career decisions, their work habits, skills, and everything they do that makes them great. Also, you can learn how to get in, get promoted, and get thriving in the sports industry. Rubes, how are we, mate?
G'day, Ryan. I'm doing fantastic. Thank you. Explain innovational. What does that mean?
You're a man of innovation.
Do you mean innovative?
Innovative. That is a word, I will say.
I think that's the word that you mean.
I looked it up before.
Innovational.
I've even got it here. Innovational. Yep, it is there. It is an adjective for creative.
There you go.
So
I thought it was built into innovative, but perhaps not. Oxford's saying otherwise.
I reckon I might have said innovative once upon a time as well. It rings a bell. But if anyone wants to check that and let us know, please do so. But Google is saying it's a word, so
well, there you go.
We'll back Googling.
We learn lots of different things every single week on this podcast, and there's another one.
Jeez, we're learning new words. What's been happening?
Oh, plenty. I feel like Melbourne just snapped a cold front on us immediately. It's gone from 100 to 0 all at once. So, those wintry treks into the office are back.
Yeah, it was a bit harder to wake up this morning. I had the full kit on last night in bed. I was freezing. Wore socks to bed. That's how cold it was, which is pretty rogue for me. But anyway, yeah, you're dead right. The cold snap is finally here.
And your birthday last week, how is the golf cart?
The golf cart. I set it up inside just to test it how it works. I wasn't able to get out in the on the course last weekend. Obviously, the rain was pretty shocking. But this week, hopefully, we'll get out there and test it. But yeah, all good at HQ. A great haul of presents for my birthday. It was brilliant.
Excellent. So. Well played by you.
No, thank you. Alrighty, let's get cracking. If you don't already, please follow us on LinkedIn. And if you want to connect with us and hundreds of others working in sport, become a member of the SportsGRAD community. Rubes, what is going on in the community right now?
Yeah, lots of wins going on, which we love. We've got our little channel set up where everyone shares their successes of the week. So a couple of people to call out. Bradley Colero, he's just done his induction at the AFL. He's working in Alice Springs with AFL NT, but he's back in Melbourne to do his induction at HQ. So well done to you, Bradley. Debashish recently joined Spark Event Group. He's about about to join their casual workforce doing their series of events, which, around the 12-month calendar includes the likes of the Australian Open and the Australian Grand Prix. So a lot to look out for Debashish. And then Rebecca Rutherford, speaking of major events, has just been offered a volunteer role at the FIFA Women's World Cup, which is going to be an extraordinary piece of experience to add to her resume. So well done to you, Rebecca. But then on top of that, we've got a whole bunch of events coming up. And our new sort of theme for this round of events is meet people in sport at sport.
Yep.
And so if you're in Brisbane, you've got the chance at a Brisbane Broncos game in a week or two to come and hang out with the SportsGrad community over an NRL game. They're playing the Penrith Panthers. It's going to be an incredible match, going to be an incredible chance to meet people in the sports industry. Then if you're in Melbourne, don't worry, we're coming to a Melbourne Football Club game as well. Sydney, we've got events lined up for you, don't worry. And then if you're in Europe this June and July, keep your eyes peeled because there's some announcements coming very soon about meetup opportunities over on the other side of the world.
Very, very exciting.
Lots happening. So if you want to stay up to date with everything that's happening in the world of SportsGrad, and if you'd enjoy a quick email from us each Friday with all the latest updates, then head to sportsgrad.com.au/newsletter to subscribe. There's links in our show notes to join.
Brilliant. Well, there's a massive episode coming up, so grab a pen, enjoy this chat with Rana Hussain. With a new course, Deakin Business School is preparing graduates to capitalise on the golden opportunities in sports management. It's time to take charge of your career with the Executive Masters of Sports Management, a one-of-a-kind qualification which is designed as a more advanced version of Deakin's popular Master of Business in Sports Management, which is the #1 ranked program of its kind in Australia. Delivered online via Deakin's Cloud Campus, the EMSB provides students with a focus on specific business knowledge, including areas of strategy, sports governance, leadership, and fan engagement. Capitalise on the golden decade with a degree that will give you the skills you need. Rana, welcome to the SportsGrad podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right, it's a pleasure to finally get you in this room. We're very excited to be chatting with you finally. But I wanted to start somewhere a little different today, and that was with your LinkedIn tagline. So I was having a look at your LinkedIn. You've done an incredible amount of things, but your tagline says fostering belonging and connection through sport and media.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could explain why this sits at the top of your profile.
Oh, it's a really good question because I've changed that so many times, and some of it's semantics, right? But I really struggle to define what it is that I do and have a good elevator pitch, which you need in life and in my business especially, because what I do is so sprawling and vast. It's very hard to explain, and I just want a neat little phrase that I can tell people. I just crave some days I'd love to just be able to say I'm a teacher, and that explains it. There's not much more I have to say. So I thought about that phrasing a lot, and it used to be connecting through sport and media, or diversity and inclusion specialist. And I think when I sort of thought about it and really distilled what it is that I do, there really seems to be two areas that I play in, although I'd love to broaden that out. So I don't know how long it'll stay like that. But I think, sport and media are my two happy places, really, and where I've just gravitated towards. But what I do in those spaces was always about belonging. It started off as, cultural competency and community connection, and then inclusion and diversity. But really, as I've evolved, and belonging is one of those kind of zeitgeist words at the moment, but it really makes a lot of sense to me. And when I realised that was kind of what I'm doing, and then when the rest of the world started talking about belonging, I thought, yeah, okay, I think that's it for me. And really that's tied to who I am as a person and the way I grew up, which was both feeling like I do belong and I really don't belong. And that's always been at the core for me. amazes me how much that's driven everything that I've done, even when I don't realise it. And so anytime, media, I like doing it. I think I'm okay at it. I don't think I'm great at it, but I still turn up to do it because helping other people feel like they belong and feel represented is so important to me. So those are that's really the crux of what I do at the end of the day.
Amazing. I love how it's taken some iterations to land on that wording, but cool that it's like focused on the outcome that you want to create rather than say what you do day to day.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good pickup because in my mind, and one day I'll put this all on a website, I reckon, I do, fostering belonging, it happens in so many different ways for me. It's not just through a D&I role. It's, the conversations I have that nobody knows about, behind the scenes. It's championing other people. So it's kind of I feel like my life is a meditation on that. And it just, I have so many interests and I am creative, so I do it in a lot of different ways.
Amazing.
Love it. It's definitely better than my LinkedIn headline. Might need to do a bit of work on that one. We start every episode with some quick fire questions, and that's basically for our listeners to get to know you a little bit better. So I'll kick us off. What was your first ever job?
I was a teacher aide at a primary school, and it was very late. I didn't have a part-time job growing up. I wasn't allowed to. My parents were like, no, you're going to focus on your studies. So early adulthood, I just decided I was going to do something. I was trying to work out if I wanted to be a teacher or a counsellor, so I beeline to that job.
Nice.
And what did you study at university?
I did a creative arts degree at Melbourne Uni, and then I went on to do a master's in social work, which is kind of now, I feel like, at the time I was sort of like, I don't know what I'm doing, but this makes sense to me. It's what I want to do. This will turn into something, and now I can really see how they've both kind of converged for me.
Yeah, nice. What's your favourite sporting moment?
I know, I just remembered what I wrote. This is one of the hardest questions you could ask a sports fan. I just looked at it, and even now when you ask it, I just think, that's too much. My mind boggles. One that comes to mind a lot is Scott Boland, Boxing Day. What was that now,
2021.
Yeah.
Mm.
For a few reasons. It was just amazing to be there and just to kind of every couple of minutes hear the crowd just erupt because he's taken another wicket. But his debut as an Indigenous player for the Australian Test team, I think we all understood what that moment meant, but for me, and if you just stop and kind of think about it even a little bit more, the Australian Test team has for so long been the symbol of what Australian masculinity means. It's the national team. It's the national team. The baggy green means so much to us from a symbolic point of view. So to finally have an Indigenous man pull that on and then not only do that but then just slay and then, go on to win the Muller Medal, which was named after Johnny Muller, who was first Indigenous captain ever in Australian cricket, and the first touring team, which was an all Aboriginal team. So there's so much symmetry and just beautiful poetry in that. It was quite a moment, and then to be working at Cricket Australia at the time and to see all that kind of come together was really, really beautiful. So I think that's probably one that's up there.
That's a great one. I was there that day too. Though I missed the last day of the test match because I think everyone in the crowd on the first 3 days got COVID. That was when Omicron was running rife.
I got COVID that test match. That was the only test match I attended that summer, and I got COVID, but I'm glad I was there.
I chose not to go that day. Beauty.
What is one of your favourite interview questions to ask candidates?
I'm a terrible person to have on an interview panel because I'll always go deep, why do you want to do this? What is it? What drives you? What's your purpose? Which not everyone's ready for, and it's probably quite unfair. So I do like to ask and know, because this was asked of me actually, what does support look like for you? Because I think you know, in interviews, we all like to do that dance where, you know, I'm going to be great and it's all going to work out and I'll never need any help and we're going to trust you and we're never going to, you know, we'll just expect you to know everything as soon as you walk through the door. The reality is that's never the case. And shit happens, and you need to be in a workplace where people are going to support you, and that looks so different for everybody. And so I love the idea of a boss or an employer saying, you know, what would support look like so we can be set up for you, and an employee walking into their workplace knowing that that conversation's been had. And so when they're not feeling supported, they can say, hey, this is what I really need, and we talked about this. So that's kind of what I would hope. That's the kind of conversation I think interviews should be.
Another highly empathetic leader who came on a couple of episodes ago was Emily Jackson, head of legal at FIFA Women's World Cup, and she said one of her favourite questions is, you know, what's your management style? How do you like to be managed? So cool to hear that that's a kind of consistent theme among people who want people to enjoy work.
Yeah, I don't know how else to work. How else? I don't get the best out of myself if I haven't had those conversations, and I've worked in so many workplaces where that's been the case, and I just inevitably fail. And whether I fail on paper or not, but I don't feel good, and I know I haven't gotten the best out of myself and they haven't gotten the best out of me. And so I just don't know how you do operate in a team where you don't lay that kind of foundation. And I think sport is so good at that and good at those conversations. You know, what does team look like for us? And so I think it's just good for any workplace, really.
Is there a particular book or podcast that you'd recommend that's helped you at work?
Sorry, I realise these are meant to be fast questions.
That's okay.
That's fine.
Yeah, so many. And I have so many books that I buy for work and also haven't gotten around to reading, but I know I will one day. Dare to Lead was a game changer for me, and I think for a lot of people, and it feels a bit cliche to say, but Brené Brown's work in general for workplaces, I mean, I think it's just crucial reading. But there's so much, like I can't possibly canvas it. I think just, you know, authenticity and being okay with being vulnerable has really made life a lot easier for me.
Awesome. Are you associated with any grassroots clubs at all?
This is such a hard question, and it's weird that I don't think about this more working in sport. Grassroots sport has always been a challenge for me and still is, and is the reason why I got into sport. And so it's alarming to me how little time I spend in grassroots sport, because that's kind of where the most discrimination I've experienced has ever happened. The hardest place it feels like to walk into, the place where I desperately want to find a community but don't repeatedly. So I don't, it's sad. It's really a sad question for me that I don't have a local footy club or a cricket club that I feel an affinity to. And I think that would be very different if I was growing up now. I think it's just the generation that I grew up in, and being a woman and then a person of colour. I have tried desperately to get my daughter into sport, and it just hasn't worked. She's broken my heart, which is fine. She's allowed to be who she wants to be. But I was so like, okay, this is my chance to have a sporting community. So no, not really. I don't, I feel an affinity to like the Essendon Cricket Club. My nephew plays there. I grew up in Essendon, so that's probably, if anything. And then I always will kind of just turn up to local games because I love the atmosphere. But no.
That's all right.
I'm open to be adopted. So if anyone wants me, give me a shout out.
Submit your requests.
Would you go and play cricket, or is there another sport you have in mind?
I think I would love to play cricket. I'm not good.
That's okay.
As long as people are fine with me sucking, I'd happily, I will be so into it, just not talented, that's all. But yeah, I reckon I think there's a cricket career in me.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, if anyone's looking to recruit for next season, Rana's putting her hand up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And last one, which might also be tricky, if you had 30 minutes to pick the brain of anybody in the world, who would it be?
I mean, not to repeat myself, but Brené Brown. I mean, I did meet her. Richmond Footy Club brought her out because they were doing some leadership training with her. And I didn't get to do the training. I was so devastated. But it was for particular people. But I got to be at the footy with her in a box. And she'd come off like a really busy day, and the last thing she wanted was for, the little nerd me to be picking it. And so I just asked her one question and then just sat there with a big beaming smile on my face. So I felt I got close to it but didn't actually get to pick her brain. But that's one I'd love to. I feel, when you admire someone, you just feel like you'd be good friends. Feel like we'd get along really well. There's so many other people. That's me though. I would happily sit down with anyone, and I just like to get kind of understand people and how they work and what makes them tick. But Brené is one that I know if I could, I'd get a lot out of it.
Amazing. Well, that's why we've got you here, to understand you and what makes you tick and all the things that have happened in your career. So perhaps to kind of add some context, could you walk us through what are the different jobs that you've got going on right now? Because, again, we looked at your LinkedIn profile. There's about 4 different things that say present. So what are you up to at the minute?
I know. Everybody's annoyed with me because I just can never give them a straight answer. I work part-time at Champions of Change. That's probably taking up the bulk of my time. And that's a not-for-profit gender equality organisation. And we work with CEOs. And basically the crux of that work is we understand that CEOs and leaders have the ability to accelerate change. And, in the pursuit of a more equal world, if leaders get on board, they can kind of cut through and really make change happen. And so Champions of Change kind of goes to the heart of power to influence and evolve their thinking and those leaders' thinking, not just for their organisations but also themselves as individuals, and help them. It's kind of personal development for them, but also kind of providing tools and resources for them to use in their organisations. And so we do that across a number of industries, but I work obviously with the sports CEOs. So we have about 16 CEOs that I work closely with, and it's an interesting job to have. It's part influencing, part supporting, part challenging. Sometimes it is a hard conversation saying, have you thought about this? But what about this? So that's the work that I do. But then outside of that, I also do a fair bit of consulting. I work with Ben Simmons Family Foundation, which was a foundation that sort of came out in the middle of COVID. And really my first work with them was the Do More project, which came sort of arise because Ben was in Philly during the Black Lives Matter movement and saw the protests erupting on the streets, in person. And as a biracial guy, it really spoke to him, but he also is an Australian, and he sort of thought, well, I feel like I need to do something, but my people are Australian. I don't know how I can insert myself in a really American conversation. So then he's, and he kind of, obviously, as most people with that kind of profile do, thought, well, I've got influence, how can I use it? And so we sort of curated a few resources and started to have conversations, and it's just sort of grown from there. And now we're working on scholarships for students of colour at CEDA, which is really in pursuit of having more diversity across the sports sector. But yeah, a lot of consulting, a lot of talking to leaders and helping them think through issues, and then smattering of media.
What are the sort of media commitments that you get called up for?
A lot on the ABC TV and radio. I have a little spot on ABC local radio, which I do every week, which is not sport related at all. It's very silly. It's pop culture nostalgia, just to keep things balanced for myself. People are like, why do you do that? Like, you're so busy, why do you still do that? It makes me so happy and it fills my cup. I love pop culture. And it's another way, to our kind of earlier conversation, it's another way for me to seed in conversations about, you know, belonging and history, and how often what ends up happening is I take a pop culture moment that happened in that week and think about how have we evolved since then, how would we view it now, what's changed, who was let into that moment. Because I think where that comes from for me is I grew up using pop culture as my education for a life that wasn't Indian or Muslim, because my parents are migrants, they had no idea. So to learn about how everybody else thought, it was what was on TV, what's music telling me, what's the zeitgeist telling me. And so I learned that was my education. So I often felt like I was on the outside looking into those moments, and so now I like to unpack them and talk about that. So yeah, everything kind of points towards representation and belonging for me. It seeps through even if I don't want it to.
Nice.
But yeah, and then, you know, offsiders, talking about sport, hopefully doing some stuff for the FIFA Women's World Cup. But yeah.
Like ground presenting? Because we saw you at the
yes.
T20 World Cup last year, and over the Cricket Australia summer on the field doing all the ground announcing. Is that something you're still involved in?
Yeah, I was really honoured to be asked to do that. Ground announcing was never something I thought I would ever do, but they asked. And then while I worked at Cricket Australia, I was sort of in the people who organise those things, their ear saying, cricket is a really diverse game. Where are the different faces? Where are the Indians? Where are the Sri Lankans? Come on, like, we want to see ourselves. And then, of course, they turned around on me and said, all right, show us what you've got. So I did do that over the summer. I won't be ground announcing at the World Cup, but broadcasting with the ABC. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm, as you probably will ask me, I'm just, if someone asks me to do something and I've got time, it's a yes. I fully believe in leaning into opportunities when they present. So that's why my LinkedIn looks like that.
Yeah, wow. There's a lot happening.
There's a lot happening, yeah.
A lot happening. So that's incredible. Keen to hear, how did you get to this point? Because obviously, what are some of those roles that you had sort of coming out of uni that have led you to this position now?
So, like I said, I did a social work master's, and I did the social work master's because that first job as a teacher aide was kind of a test for me. I thought everybody said, oh, you should be a teacher, and maybe I should have been. So I thought, okay, there's something in me that was just like, I don't think that's for me, but maybe I should just see what that's about. So I took that job, and I loved being with the kids. I loved it. It was a primary school. And I knew I wanted to be involved in their lives and help them, but I really hated telling them to line up or wear their uniform properly. Like, I just didn't care. But I loved, when they talked to me about the friendship problems they had or just what their thoughts were, what movies they were watching. So I started hanging out with the school counsellor and realised that was probably more my speed. So I went and did a social work degree and then went back to that school. She went on maternity leave and I took over her role. And so I became the school counsellor. And a big part of that job was not just the one-to-one counselling, but producing education, wellbeing education for the students and helping them to understand the world that they lived in and how they should interact with it. And I would always bring in sport, being a huge footy fan and cricket fan, and realising that if I did that, they were more likely to listen to me than anything else. Especially the young boys, and I know that's very gendered, but at that time and in that school, it's a very multicultural school, the young boys in particular weren't really interested in feelings or talking about feelings. They really wanted to learn about, what Basher Hooley was doing, and so it was a much easier conversation. So I started to weave sport into that work, and I realised just how much I loved that and was more interested in the sport side of it and what that did for the conversation than the actual conversation we were having. I cared about it. And so I just felt like, and simultaneously I saw the challenges that community was facing. It was a very insular community, and I grew up interacting outside of my community bubble a lot and getting a lot of benefit from it. Sport was one of them. Being able to go to the footy and understanding the sporting world really helped me move through society. And so I wanted that community to feel the benefit of a sporting community and connect those two worlds. And so the AFL began a AFL Multicultural Ambassador program, purely volunteer. But as soon as I saw those two words, like AFL and multicultural, I just ran at it. And I volunteered with them for about 4 years. And that was sort of my entrance into the sporting world. I didn't do a lot, I have to say. Like, there were other ambassadors who were really active and, ran programs, and I still just kind of observed and found my feet a little bit, and then eventually realised that I've got something here, like I think I could contribute. And when Adam Goodes started to get booed, it was kind of like a defining moment for me. I just was fed up and frustrated and thought, no, I have a voice and I have a skill set here that I could probably offer up. And so it was just through those networks that I said, like, I want to work in this industry. I don't care what it is. I just know that if I'm in there, I'll make something happen here. And so it was literally just that volunteer program, then talking to the people who ran it, and then they kind of found something for me.
Amazing.
Wow.
And then from there, were there a few steps between that volunteer role and what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I spoke to Ali Fahua, who was at the AFL at the time. He's now running Basher Hooley's program and just killing it. He was the one I said to. Actually, I was at the 2016 Western Bulldogs grand final when they won. I said to him, look, I'm looking for something. It doesn't matter what it is. I've already quit my job. So you have to find me something. And they were offering traineeships from the Basher Hooley Foundation, and one of them was at the Richmond Footy Club. And Richmond were looking for someone who could connect them with Indian communities. But in a fan engagement and marketing role, which after my creative arts degree and social work degree, I was pretty sure I wasn't going to get, but somehow they took me. And I just started in that role. I truly had no idea what I was meant to do or was doing, but committed to just kind of paying attention and working it out. My first year I was organising VFL games and fan engagement for those games, and I remember my first Dreamtime, it was the VFL game before the Dreamtime match at the G, and it was just thousands of people, and I was on the door running it all and stuffing it up completely. It wasn't run very well, but learning quite a bit. And after that year, I sort of worked out, as much as we do need to connect with the Indian community from a fan engagement point of view, actually what I know these people need is for footy clubs to understand them better, and for footy clubs to say, we will come to you and we will make our environment more welcoming and inclusive so that you want to turn up. Because it's not a very different conversation, but if you don't feel like you're welcome somewhere or that product is for you, you're just never going to bother even engaging with it. And so instead of saying, all right, let me help you market to these communities, it was more a conversation about how do we look and sound more inclusive and welcoming and be more welcoming. And so that's when my title changed to diversity and inclusion, and I kind of went on this journey, and I stayed there for the next kind of 5 years doing that role.
Amazing. And then Cricket Australia after that in the same sort of role?
Yeah, pretty much the same role, just a little bit more senior. COVID hit at Richmond. I think in this job you have to stay fresh, and I felt like I'd done that first push of kind of breaking ground, and someone else needed to come and build it up more. At the same time, the Collingwood racism scandal started happening, and they were looking for experts for their anti-racism expert group, and they asked me to be part of it, and it meant I couldn't stay at Richmond. It wasn't a big job. It was kind of like a, once a quarter meeting sort of thing. But it did mean getting under the hood of that club and understanding that club and having to leave Richmond behind. But I felt like it was really important learning for me. So I did take that. And then, Cricket Australia, the job landed in my lap, so to speak. That was that.
Amazing. And for those who are looking at the diversity and inclusion space as an area that they might want to work in the future, we've heard a few examples of some of the projects you worked on, but when you enter a D&I role, what's your remit? Like, what do you do in those roles?
It's so funny because the role at Richmond we created. It wasn't there. We sort of made it to suit me in a lot of ways. And then they've built it out since then. So the sports D&I roles are very different to corporate D&I or other D&I roles, which I've come to learn as I delve into more of those spaces. They're so different, and I love the sports D&I roles because that's more about looking at fans or members and athletes and stuff. So it's a big job, but looking at how do you make sure that everybody can play, everybody can turn up if they want to, how do you make sure that the policies are, suit everybody and accommodate everybody. So it's really working closely with people and culture teams, but then also working really closely with marketing and sponsorship. You really become a team that works across the entire organisation because what you're trying to do is lift their capability and open up. Unfortunately, because of history, a lot of sporting organisations aren't very diverse, and people's understanding of diversity and inclusion could be a lot better. And so really the job at the end of the day, I think, is helping everyone in the organisation to open up their minds and think about who are we pitching things at, who are we talking to, who do we want to engage. There's really formal ways of doing that, and strategically organisations now, it's changed so much since I started, it has really exploded. Organisations now go, okay, we need to make sure that for the LGBTQ community, we are speaking their language and we are open and safe. For culturally diverse communities, we are open and safe. So, they're all very different conversations, people with different accessibility needs. So you're having 5 or 6 different really nuanced conversations on a number of different levels. And so it can be really a sprawling job, but ultimately you're breaking down 100, 200 years of tradition that really pitched sport to white men and saying, okay, what does that look like now for a lot of different communities?
So it sounds like it's kind of your role to almost empower everyone within the organisation to make the team or the sport more inclusive, as opposed to just being the only person who makes it inclusive.
Exactly, and I think when I started out, that is what the job was. It was me and a couple of other people doing all the work and running programs. I think where the industry's gotten to now is it's enabling others to do that and understand how they build their products or programs to be for a lot more people.
And are there any sort of essential skills or experiences required to do this sort of job?
Depends who you ask. I mean, I'm a testament to the fact that you don't need that. I think if you've got the kind of sound thinking, you're aware of what's going on around the world, and you're happy to do your own reading and understand that there's not one way, there's not one existence, there's not one viewpoint, that everybody comes to life from a different upbringing and experience, then you understand, okay, I need to tailor programs and I need to not assume our way is the right way. And I think the key skill set is empathy and being able to be inquisitive and curious and respectful. So I think people see, and necessarily diversity and inclusion is positioned as there's a core group and then there's all these other groups, which I think is just fundamentally wrong. I think at the end of the day, a good diversity and inclusion practice is about understanding that we're all very, very different. and tailoring the workplace, and how do you make the workplace or the sporting environment flex as much as it can. And when you get someone who is different turning up, how do you then respond to that, or how do you prepare for that difference and accommodate? I think that's best practice to me. There are some basics there that you need around understanding safety and discrimination. I think that's probably, if you don't have a sound understanding of what's discriminatory and what's not, you're not going to be very good at your job. But outside of that, I think most people can do it, but it's the type of person that you are.
And you've got to care about it deeply. Like you can't fake it. Like you have to be curious and care.
Exactly. I think you can learn it, but if you don't care, if you're a one size fits all type of person, it's going to be very hard to do the job. And sometimes that's the kind of work you end up doing because of the scale of something. But I think if you can't tune in to different lived experience, it's going to be a really hard job for you.
Yeah.
Just out of interest, who is doing it particularly well that you've seen? Like what clubs, what sports are leading the way in this space?
I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of local clubs, and I do hear about them. My world is very much the elite sporting world. Tennis Australia are real standouts to me. I mean, I work with them at Champions of Change, but I've also been involved. I haven't been involved, but they've shown me a lot of the work and often, seek advice. And they're just, I think their thinking and processes are really good. So they worked on their own internal capability first. They really lifted the internal education. And then, they've got the luxury of having the Australian Open, which is a beautiful platform for them to showcase that. And so they've really taken steps to make sure that is a really inclusive and welcoming environment. And some of it's really simple, like putting in prayer rooms is so easy, but once you do it and then you let people, you do it with consultation with the communities, and then you make sure it's there, and then you let those communities know, suddenly you get an influx of those communities at your event, and it's kind of a no-brainer. So they've cracked that beautiful balance between this is good for business and it's also the right thing to do, and we're doing it in a respectful way. So Kerry Tavro at Tennis Australia is amazing, and you should definitely get him on the podcast if you haven't already. He doesn't just do the work because he knows it's good for business, which he does know. He also does it in a really consultative way where he puts that community front and centre and helps them design what it is that they need. And I think it's a really good case study in what good D&I looks like.
Well, we had one of his direct reports on way back when. Anna Livingston, have you come across her?
Yep.
Yeah, she was in episode 145 way back when, so we might have to get Carrie on.
Yeah. I think you're going to have to. He really has taken Tennis Australia, I think, into the future when it comes to D&I, and he's not done yet either. There's so much more he's got cooking. And I think D&I, what I've noticed in sport, there's a lot of turnover because it's a hard job. I think a lot of people go, what do they even do? Or it seems pretty cushy. The reality is you're constantly pushing against the grain of an organisation, and it's a real balance between challenging what the organisation has always done and fitting in. And I think it's really hard, especially for people with lived experience. I've seen so many people, whether it's Indigenous staff or people from culturally diverse backgrounds or queer people, who come in as the only person of their lived experience, and it's their job to change everything and be the advocate and champion every day, not only outwardly but internally. That's so hard. And so it's, you see high turnover in D&I roles. And because you are lumped with quite a lot of work usually, where in the corporate sector you'd have a whole department, often it's one or two staff members. So it is taxing. But I've seen with Kerry, because he has stayed there and he's been able to build it and build it and build it, they've got that kind of consistency and being able to actually create this legacy.
Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah, that sounds
I've just
amazing.
got one more question. I know I've gone deep
Hone
into
in.
this line, but like I can imagine a lot of people wouldn't be a nice thing for them to just like their job is to constantly challenge. Like it could sound like a pretty tough role to continue to do. Is there a particular approach that you take when challenging people in the way they do? Because I can imagine, you know, you're opening yourself up to get pushback. So how do you open up that conversation in a way that is constructive?
Oh, I've tried every way. And I will try every way, depending on what I think is going to work. Yeah, look, I think as I get further on in my career, I've learnt the private, constructive conversation is always the best one. And I will always try that first. Let me pick up the phone, let me sit down with the CEO, let me present a case and say, why don't we try? How about we try? Let's just try it. Because I think that's going to get you further. But there are times where you have to draw a line or you have to stand up for something and say that's just really wrong. And often what happens is decisions will get made without you or in spite of you, or you weren't aware of it. And so you find something out and it's too far down the line to change it and you have to course correct it. So I think that's when you often have to kind of have a bit of a blunt tool, or if you think, you know, that you're at risk of something. So that's when you're having a much stronger conversation. I think there are things that often in D&I people can't see further down the line, or you're risk mitigating. So it's a lot of, if we don't do this, we're going to kind of be up for a lot of scrutiny. And so then you'll do it and people don't realise what you've avoided as well. You know, getting really boring policies tabled. But people, and especially in sport, people aren't interested in policy. Like no one wants to work on policy or action plans. It can be really dry work. But when you do it and when it's there, it does actually avoid so much. So sometimes that's the harder conversation. I always think it's less about the challenge and more about getting people's attention, to be honest, because there's always so much more happening. There's more pressing issues. There's sponsorship dollars to talk about, and often people just see D&I as kind of the side work, and really getting it tabled and paid attention to. That's the hard part.
Yeah.
Nice. Big question that a lot of our listeners ask themselves is like, am I going on the right career path? And I'm keen to hear sort of out of all the roles that you've had so far, like when was that moment where you were just left saying like, yep, this is for me, this is the job for me? How did you know?
God, I'm still asking myself that. So I think that is lesson one. Is you may never not ask yourself that question. I mean, I think people are very lucky when they land in the thing and go, yep, this is me and this will always be me.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those people. I will always be looking, you know, ahead or across to say what else could I be doing. And I've done a lot of personality tests to just accept that that's me. Maybe that's a strength. And I might just have to use that. I did one the other day. I'm not kidding. I do a lot of personality tests because I just want the reassurance that I'm not super batty. And one of them was, you have great ideas and you'll always, you know, have the forward-thinking idea. You just need a team to help you make it happen. So I was like, oh, yeah, that's definitely me. I think, so I had a moment when I was counselling at the primary school. I had a moment one day after school. I was waiting for my partner to pick me up and I just had some stuff was happening. I think I had an encounter with someone on the road or things were just percolating in my head and I just wrote it all down. And it was just a piece of writing about what it means to be a person of colour in Australia and kind of having those dual identities and how much I was very much a trashy bogan on the inside, but people looking at me would never pick that. You know, my interest in sport, the TV shows that I watch, the language I use, like it just, how funny it was to me that people look at me and have a completely different idea of who I might be, but then when they get to know me, they're always like, "Oh my gosh, you're just like us."
You got the weekend jet ski and the holidays to Bali.
Yeah, exactly. And so I just started writing about that, and it just kind of poured out of me. And then I read it and I thought, I feel like this is something. And so I sent it off to a publication and said, do you want this? And straight away they were like, yep, we're publishing this. And it was kind of like that moment where I went, oh, yeah, I have stuff to say and I think people would be interested in it. And it's not just stuff to say about anything, it's connecting worlds, it's building bridges between communities. So that was kind of the first moment where I was like, yeah, I have to quit my job. As much as I loved that job, I was like, oh, there's so many other things I want to be doing. And then another moment was when, there's plenty of them, but one that stands out was with the Richmond wheelchair team. So we were one of the first clubs to adopt a wheelchair team with AFL Victoria. It was a new competition, and we just jumped on it, and we kind of just went hammer and tong at establishing this team. The club weren't sold on it, but my team and I just went, no, we have to do this. And we all knew that it was right, but we couldn't really articulate it. And so that was one of those times where you just go, just trust we're doing it, and you just keep going forward and ask for forgiveness later. And Richmond, I don't know, we just took it by the horns, and they lost the first grand final, and then when they won the second grand final, it was just such a moment. And I just remember thinking, yeah. Like, this is what we're meant to do. A little kid came who was in a wheelchair to watch the Richmond wheelchair team play and win a grand final, and it kind of just go, oh yeah, this is the feeling, and this is what I want to do forever and ever. So I think those two things really.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Before you came on, we asked you if there were any sort of tools or resources that kind of help you in your job. And one of the things that you mentioned was values defining activities. Firstly, why did you mention that? And how has that made a difference in your professional life?
I bet everyone came with really practical stuff, and I just gave you this vague thing.
A calendar.
I know. So I've done it in various forms over the years, but last year in particular, I did this leadership program through the AIS, which is for women executives. But I also did another leadership program called Change Up, which was just a private one. And in both of those programs, we did this activity where you circle in on what your values are. And there's so many ways you can do this. You pick, and then also I did it by myself before both of those, just because I was like, I need to know, like, what do I actually care about? Because I feel like I care about everything. So what's most important to me? And so you just look at words, values words, and you start to kind of, categorize them. And you say, okay, I really don't care about these. I really, really care about these, and these I could kind of give or take. Sometimes I care about them, sometimes I don't. And you just whittle them down to, say, your top 5. And it shouldn't take you too long. You're going by instinct. I circled around kind of 5, and then over that year I just kept kind of honing them and revisiting them and working out, does this make sense to me? Is this what I actually care about and value? And then one of the best activities was to think about, when I'm at my best, when I'm at my most content, when I feel like I'm really nailing it, do these things turn up, or what turns up if not these? And it consistently was the same 5, really. Similar, some of them are semantics, but it was the same sort of concepts. And that was so crystallizing for me, because it really helped me understand the type of work I want to do, that if I don't have these present in my work and in my life, I'm really dissatisfied and I get really grumpy and depressed and angry. And if I'm not aligned with those, I'm actually just not going to achieve. So for me, that makes a huge difference. And then purpose as well. If I'm not crystal clear on purpose and values, and they're not turning up in my day-to-day, it's really debilitating for me. So I know for some people it's like location's the really important thing with work, or who you work with. For me, it's those things. And once I've worked that out about myself, it makes decision-making a lot easier. So that can play out in big choices about what you do for a living, but it can also be about what you do with your free time or things you say no to. I get a lot of requests to do things, to do podcasts, to do, to write things, attend things, and that became too much for me. And I find it really hard to say no because I am interested in everything and I could do everything. And so even in those choices, it makes a huge difference to me. I go, okay, does this align to where I'm going? Does this align to my purpose and what I want to achieve in life? Does it align to my values? If not, then I don't do it. And so I think that's why it's made my life easier. As much as it sounds so airy-fairy, it's like it makes me make decisions quicker. It makes me, when I'm down in the dumps, it helps pull me out of it. So all of that.
So it's like clear-cut decision-making and energy to get going every day.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere that people can go to on the internet, any books that people can find this sort of stuff if they're interested in diving into it?
I mean, just Google, how do I know what I value, which is exactly what I did. To be honest, Google is my big tool now because I realised, like the other day I had to write key messages and I should know how to do that. But I just felt stuck. And so I was like, how do I write key messages? Google it. Like, what should I do for a job? Google it. So I highly recommend that. But yeah, just plug in values, how to define your values. And there's so many ways that come up. Just pick one and see how you go.
Amazing.
Google's our friend.
Yep.
We're so happy you have decided to come on our podcast, by the way. You could have easily said no.
Well, you made the values test.
Excellent. Fantastic. Talk to us a little bit about the difficult parts of your job and, when have you felt most challenged in your career so far?
Yeah. I think, like I said, getting on people's radar is really, really hard, especially in this industry. There's so many people. How do you get noticed? And then in sport, D&I or conversations about belonging or community are not on people's kind of to-do list. Even now when it's exploded, it's still not really. So that I always find really challenging because it often feels like a personal affront to have to convince people that the work that I do is important. That can be really soul-crushing. So you do have to kind of find people that believe in you and agree with you, for want of a better way of phrasing that, but who get it and who remind you, what you do matters. I find that really, really challenging. I think because I'm an extrovert and I like to do a lot of things, just the grind of it, like the admin, having to do it all yourself. I think the nature of the work that I do is I'm often in a team of just me or one other person. So I think having to master everything and get everything happening is really hard. I think then the getting other people along for the ride, like the kind of influencing piece, is a challenge. You really have to be able to make your case and maintain relationships. And that's not easy with the kid and family and other stuff that you want to do. That's always challenging.
Yeah.
You've been around this space for a long time now. I'm keen to hear what social issues out there you think are still most prevalent. Like what's most an issue right now, and what issues have we made the most progress on? What has a lot of work gone into that's made a lot of improvement? Can you compare where we're at with a couple of best and worst case issues out there?
Well, I'll start by sort of answering an opposite question, which I think it's really interesting to always notice what issues aren't on the radar or have disappeared that once were interesting for people and have gone now. And what's really challenging in this kind of work is you're often riding the zeitgeist, and that's not necessarily the right thing always.
So you've mentioned zeitgeist a few times. For
sorry.
those who don't understand, what does that word mean?
It's just like what's in the popular conversation.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
What's kind of what's popping up in news, what's popping up in culture, what's on people's minds. So there was a moment during COVID where Black Lives Matter was everywhere, and suddenly workplaces were saying, how do we have conversations about race? That's not really happening like it was before. And some of that's natural, you can't be that intense about things all the time. But it's interesting to see when people care and when they don't. I think, naturally around marriage equality, everybody was trying to get their heads around that conversation. So I find it really interesting that cultural diversity, when I was growing up, multiculturalism was very in. And so that was very much a conversation everybody and every leader was having. It's kind of went away. It's sort of coming back because the last census showed us how diverse we are and how many migrant populations we do have. So now when we've got workforce pressures, people are suddenly back onto that conversation. So it's always part of my practice to scan the culture and see what are we talking about, what also aren't we talking about. But I think, the voice is clearly the biggest conversation nationally at the moment, or one of, and workplaces and sporting organisations at the elite level are all grappling with that. But I think it's less about the voice itself and more the role of sporting organisations, especially elite ones, where there's so much interest and eyeballs are on everything that they do. The conversation really underneath it is what's their role in society? What role are they meant to play? And there's some people who will say, well, you shouldn't get involved in politics. And there's others who say, but you're the biggest brands in the country. Your take on things matters and can influence, and you have an opportunity and maybe a responsibility to help people through these decisions. And so I think that's the biggest conversation. When I sit with the CEOs that I work with, that's constantly an issue for them. And even in my D&I roles, it's often advising, when do we speak up on social issues, when don't we? How's it going to affect us if we do or don't? And so I think for sport more and more, as the world evolves and sport and politics mix, as it always has, but we have a better understanding of it, it's what is the role of sport? What is its responsibility to weigh in on these issues? And then I think, the other issue is, how do we actually walk the talk? I think everybody understands that diversity is a good thing and diversity of thinking is a good thing, but we're not seeing the change at leadership level as much as we would probably like to. So how do you actually do the work of that? How do you get different people into this sporting environment when they haven't traditionally been there? I think that's still the crux of the conversation. And for a lot of people, they're still looking at women, why don't we see more women leaders in sport? But I think it's coming.
So it sounds like sport should be thinking more about what role they play within different issues that are out there.
Yeah, and I think that's changed. That is ever evolving. I think sport was very much, the beauty of sport for some people is that it doesn't involve itself at all. And there's a part of me that feels that way too. I grew up post 9/11 and sport was the place where I parked all of that, all of that baggage. I didn't have to weigh into it. So it's a really weird tension for me to be in this job where I actually want to protect sport from some of it, because that is the beauty of it and that's why I loved it so much. So how do you help people be their full selves in sport but also not have to bring the baggage too? It's a weird dance.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough balance. Like some people just, using footy for instance, probably just go to the footy on the weekend to switch off.
Yeah.
And I can see why some people would be like, I don't want to think about other issues. I just want to watch the footy.
Yeah, I'm one of those people. When I worked at Richmond, my favourite part of the week, footy clubs are so beautiful. It's got such a beautiful cadence. You build up to that game day moment. And then once the siren goes, it all goes away. And my favourite thing was to sit by myself, not with the players, not with the staff, just by myself and watch the game and not talk to anyone. It's just like a meditative thing for me. It tells you what a nuffy I am. But that was my favourite bit, and I often thought, God, I really get it when people say just don't mess with the sport, and they often see people like me as doing that, as messing with something that's quite precious to them on a personal level. And I often say, it's not that. I don't want to touch what happens siren to siren. What I do want is for other people to have that experience with sport, and that's what we're talking about usually.
Yeah.
It's been awesome. I feel like there's a lot of people who are thinking about getting into this space or aren't sure about this space, and to hear all the issues that you've kind of surfaced or explained actually what goes into this role would be quite eye-opening for a lot of people.
I would say that if you want to work in sport, you don't have to love sport, but I think loving it makes it so much easier because it is tough, it is complicated, and I think having a healthy foot outside of sport is really important. But people come for sport so much, it can get slammed so quickly. So if you love it, it just makes it such a breeze. So yeah.
Brilliant. Last question: if you could drop a note on the desk of a university student, we love this question, for them to reach your role, what would you say on that note?
I said it before, which is just say yes to every opportunity that comes your way. Just lean into it, even if it's scary. Just give it a go. You'll either find out that you absolutely hate it and never want to do it again, or you might find that you love it, or there's something else there for you. So that's my advice to everyone. Just say yes, especially when you're young and you don't have other responsibilities. That's the time to try everything. And then I think really in the same vein, volunteer. I think so many of us wait for the opportunity to be tapped on the shoulder. Just volunteer, whether it's in an organisation or just offer to do something or say, can I come along with you? I still do that. I'm looking at, branching out on my own and doing more of my own consulting, and I'm talking to people who are a few steps ahead of me saying, can I just shadow you? Can I come and sit with you and watch you do your thing? That's how I personally learn. So and you don't know until you've seen it sometimes. You kind of need to see someone model it for you. So just putting your hand up and saying, can I come along and just watch you even? I think that's the key. And every job I've ever gotten is through a network. I've never, ever, I don't know what that means, but I've never gotten a job where I've just cold applied and gotten the job. It's always through someone's tapped me on the shoulder, someone said, have you got a job? I know Rana, she's great. Have you got a job? It's, the network. So the more you get involved, the more networks you build, and that leads to something else.
Well, we have had quite a few people say, we know Rana, she's great. They were very excited to hear that you were coming into today, and thank you for deciding that our podcast fit in with what you wanted to spend your time on. So we're very grateful to have you here, but really appreciate you sharing all your insights, all your wisdom and all your knowledge in this space to help encourage more people work in that space and do so in a meaningful way. So thank you for the change that you're creating. And last time we caught up, I shared a story with you about a girl called Ankita who comes from India. She's living in Australia at the moment. I had coffee with Ankita over Christmas and New Year's, and she said that she saw you doing the ground presenting at the T20 World Cup and said, oh my gosh, there's another Indian woman out there on the field of play calling for one of the biggest tournaments in the world. And that inspired her to feel like she could do the same role at some point in the future. And so that was all that I shared with you then. She's gone on to become a presenter with the Mumbai Indians at the IPL. Oh. And I spoke to her probably a couple of weeks ago. I told her, Rana's coming on the podcast. She said, oh my gosh, can I dial in to ask her a question? She really wanted to, and we wanted to make it happen, but she's been working till 3 a.m. last night. And it's currently early morning in India. But just know that you are inspiring other people out there to do similar sort of things. And I follow her on Instagram. Looks like she's having the time of her life, working with all the players. So, just a small impact that you're making.
That's a dream job. That's amazing. Can I put that on my LinkedIn?
Yeah. That's
amazing. I'll happily answer any question she has. That's why you do it. that's the point, right? Oh, that's made my day. Thank you.
I'll let Anketa know.
Please do. Please do.
Awesome. Thanks for coming in, Rana.
Thanks for having me.
Guys, it's time now for the People's segment, Ask Sports Grad, where every week we answer a question from our community. If you'd like to ask a question first, become a SportsGrad member at our website, sportsgrad.com.au/community. Then you can add your question to our Discord channel named Ask SportsGrad. Rubes, this one comes from Aishwarya. She says, how do I stay consistent on LinkedIn? I want to grow my profile, but I keep losing momentum. Any recommendations? Great question.
Great question, Aishwarya, and a very common problem because we see a lot of people who post once or twice and then let it slip, and you never hear from them on LinkedIn again. Yep. And unless you're going to be consistent, your profile never really grows. You don't really stay top of mind unless you're constantly putting yourself out there. So to do that, the first step in staying consistent is actually understanding why are you on LinkedIn in the first place. It's kind of like what Rana said. Unless you know your purpose for being there and doing what you're doing, you're not going to have the energy to continue to do it. So first, find out, why am I on LinkedIn? Is it to get a job? Is it to meet cool people? Is it for another reason? So once you've got that figured out, then you want to figure out a frequency that you can stick to. So it might be once a week. It might be twice a week. And once you've figured out the frequency that you want to do, pick a time in the week when you are going to sit down and actually write your content so that you can start to get into a regular routine of posting, say, at 8 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. That's your time when you sit down, write, and share some content about what you've been up to. So have a purpose in mind, have a time in mind, have a frequency in mind, and just set yourself a cadence that you can stick to. Once you've done that, then you want to start generating a whole lot of ideas, because say you pick once a week on a Wednesday morning, it becomes really hard to sit down and write something on the spot. If you sit there and go, oh, what am I going to post about today? It's a really difficult session to whip something up. So the third thing you want to do is spend like a Sunday afternoon or whatever time you've got in your week just generating mass ideas. So the way to do this is think about what are the different things you want to indicate about yourself and how are the different ways that you can indicate them. For example, you might want to indicate that you've got great initiative. And one way you can indicate your initiative is through your work experience. Another way you can indicate your initiative is through the events that you go to. Another way you can indicate your initiative is through the books that you read or the podcasts that you listen to. So I would have a think about what are the things that you want to share about yourself. And typically when we encourage people to indicate certain values about themselves, we talk about values that indicate your potential. That is things that flag not how good you are right now, but how good you can be in the future when given the time to develop. Yeah. So initiative is one. Leadership is another. Emotional intelligence is another. Creative thinking is another. Indicating your previous results is the fifth one. And so if you literally draw up a grid with these indicators of potential down one side, and then across the top you've got the ways you can show it through webinars, books, experience, whatever else it is, then you've got, 20 odd squares for you to fill in the gaps and say, okay, I'm going to combine books and leadership or emotional intelligence and experience or whatever it is, stories. And you can idea generate for as long as you want. And that means when you rock up on your Wednesday morning to write your post, you've got 20 things that you can start to pick from. And if you've worked out your purpose before, then you know that I'm doing this consistently over 10 weeks to help me build my profile to get a job in sport, then that's when it becomes a lot easier, and that's how you can stay consistent on LinkedIn.
Yeah, love that. All about preparation. I honestly think the best thing that we ever did was add a little bit of time each week to plan LinkedIn posts. Like little crazy eights, even if you want to go super simple. But it's so hard just to write a LinkedIn post on the fly. Like, come on. So if you plan it out, you'll be amazed at how much easier it can be. I know I certainly have felt that in the last 6 months or so.
That's it. It's all about having systems.
Yeah.
Systems just make things so much easier.
Yeah, 100%. Brilliant. Well, if you'd like to ask us a question or ask our friends in sport a question, sign up and become a SportsGrad member today. Each week we jump on a Q&A where it's an open floor for you to ask us any questions or any industry professionals any questions. Got a chunk of them coming up, which is fantastic. All these sessions are recorded as well, so when you join, you get immediate access to all of our sessions, all exclusive content for you, which is basically like some sort of streaming service for sports industry. I've said Netflix before, but there's plenty of them. But in the meantime, find us on LinkedIn, find us and give us some love and a rating on Spotify and Apple. And thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Hey guys, one last thing before you go. If you'd enjoy a quick email from us each Friday on all the latest job openings, networking events, Q&As with industry professionals and latest podcast episodes, then subscribe to the SportsGrad newsletter. Head to our website www.sportsgrad.com.au/newsletter to subscribe. There's also a link in our show notes to join.